To talk about inclusive schooling, it has come a long way, and in many ways, it's something that continues to be in need in school districts, I know, across New York State, and in many states around the country.
Sandy Creek has an inclusive education program, K through 12. All of our students are served in regular classes. Anybody that needs a service, the service is brought to them at the classroom. Basically, how I sort of explain it to people is when a student shows up at our door, whether it's kindergarten or a transfer in from another school, we look at the student, we see what their needs are, and then we figure out a way that we can meet their needs in their classroom. We never consider where do we send them to get things. We talk about how we can bring services to them. We have a real feeling of ownership. They're our children. There's none of that, your kids, my kids. We do a lot of co-teaching. Co-teaching sort of naturally occurs in the elementary. Once they get to middle school and high school, it's a service recommendation on the IEP, and it's expanding more and more.
Inclusion is something that can be done very poorly, unfortunately, because it requires creativity, flexibility, collaboration, a lot of things that, a lot of different aspects and characteristics that teachers sometimes might not be prepared to work with or put forward.
Fortunately, when I started teaching, I came into a district that was practicing full inclusion, so I've had the ability to be included right from the start in all of the trainings that we've received.
Kim Manfredi, who I co-teach with, was in my classroom, but she was observing for an entire year before she started actually co-teaching. So it was a gradual process for us. She was able to get to know the curriculum, and we were able to get to know one another before we started co-teaching.
I do think it's important to have trainings when it comes to co-teaching because it gives you the various strategies that you can use to work with the teacher.
There's different ways to do co-teaching. It's not, here's co-teaching, this is what it looks like every day, all the time, and this is it.
There's about 5 or 6 different types of co-teaching models that the teachers can follow.
And as people are getting comfortable with it, the general ed teachers and the special ed teachers are really sort of finding that it's a lot nicer to have a colleague in there to bounce ideas off of, the kids to get different perspectives.
I have another person in there to help me move it along, to help everyone stay on pace and everyone stay on track. I just have an extra set of eyes and an extra person to help me implement it, which in that particular classroom is very helpful because I have a few students in there that need those extra reminders, hey, stay on task.
We have a real feeling of ownership. They're our children. There's none of that, your kids, my kids.
I really think that people kind of putting their heads together and saying, well, what are our resources? What do we do well? I do this well. You do this well. You do something else well. Let's connect and collaborate. Is at least a way to begin to look at inclusion and to look at the means to try to develop successful classrooms where everybody feels included.
I work with Kim Manfredi on a daily basis, and I also attend the CSE meetings of my students when I'm asked to, and I like to go. And I read my students' IEPs. I have copies of their modifications and their accommodations.
When the general education teacher and I get together to plan lessons, we try to differentiate as much as possible. Being the special education teacher, I often rely on the general education teacher for the content. I mean, she's very strong in her content area because that's what she went to school for. Usually I meet with my general education teachers every other day for a period, which is great, but it sometimes doesn't seem like enough. So we email each other constantly. We meet after school. Sometimes I meet in between periods and I'll say, how did your first period class go? Is there something we need to switch up? And we just talk about those types of things.
You want to be on the same page. You want to make sure that the kids are where they need to be and they're getting what they need. So you would need, a planning period for that.
Scheduling can be really complex and complicated. This is 6th grade through 12th grade scheduling. If you're going to co-teach, then you have to make sure that both the general ed teacher and the special ed teacher have co-teach planning time in addition to their regular planning time. So for my 9th grade special education teacher next year, she'll do Bio 9 co-taught, then she does co-teach planning with the social studies teacher on ACE days. She does a bio lab co-taught, English 9 co-taught, and then she comes over here and she plans with the English teacher every other day, her own planning. It's pretty complex because you have to make sure the teachers are free at the same time, the co-taught teachers, so that they can get some planning time in together.
The curriculum is pretty much the same for everybody, but how they're accessing that curriculum is a little different. So we make modifications and accommodations so that the kids that do have IEPs or do need a little extra help, we offer that help to help them reach up where the A honors student is.
I'm kind of thinking of an example where a 4th grade teacher might have a youngster who's new to the class and might be someone who doesn't do school particularly well. Well, talking to the 3rd grade teacher, talking to the 6th grade teacher, talking up the line, talking to the principal as the instructional leader might provide some ways and some means for that teacher to then be able to reach that student, teach that student, work with that student, regardless of the disability.
Many times when I'm working with the general education teacher, I will find out ahead of time what is going on in the class for that week or that month, and a lot of times that I try to incorporate the pre-teaching into my resource class settings, making sure that the students that are going into that class feel comfortable and knowing what the content will be for that day, and also to kind of boost them up and make them feel successful so that they're able to answer a question and not feel threatened in front of their peers or in front of their teachers.
If we're taking notes and I'm having, the notes have blanks that they have to fill in. Maybe kids that have a little trouble with reading, maybe they don't have as many blanks as the kids, that don't have those issues. So you differentiate what you're doing. It's not that the content's different, it's not that they're not responsible for the information, you just have to help them access it, provide those accommodations.
I will pre-teach again and resource to make sure that my students are aware of what's being asked exactly. So in that review game that they were doing, I made sure that they knew the exact questions that we would be asking so that they already have that in their mind before they go into it, so they're not just kind of surprised with the question. We try to make the heterogeneous grouping. Typically, if we have a group of 4 students that are working together, we make sure that 2 of them are general education students, 2 of them are special education students.
And we also like to just, make the groups as balanced as we can. I don't want to, put all the kids that are B students in one group and the A students in another group. I want to mix them up so they can help one another.
One important thing we did when looking at this lesson was making sure that we knew the exact students that would be in each group.
In all my classes, when we do group work, I tend to assign the groups. And in the co-taught class, Kim and I do that.
We had 4 groups. There were 4 students each.
Team 1 is Dylan Anthony, Eddie, John, and Scott. You are team 1.
And we made sure that we put some of the weaker students with some of the stronger students. But then we also looked at there are certain students, they could be special education or general education, that actually help out other students that have more needs, and we made sure that we put those together. I know one student works really well with another student. We made sure that they were in the same grouping so that he could support him. It's kind of like a peer mentor, if that makes sense. We just pre-made the groups, basically, without letting the students know that we pre-made the groups.
I think we need to look to ourselves in many ways for our particular strengths and our particular successes, for the ways that we've been created with different kinds of learners, the way we've been flexible, the way we've collaborated to really be successful with learners. Look at those kinds of strengths and almost take an inventory of them, and in-house create opportunities for people to share those ideas and share those notions with one another.
In the particular lesson that I worked on with my general education teacher today, we came up with 2 strategies that we used in the classroom. The first was like a lead support type of co-teaching model, where in one instance the general education teacher was the leader and I was the support. And then in the other instance, I was the leader and the general education teacher was the supporter. Then we moved into a group activity where we switched over into a team teaching model, so that we're both teaching the same content at the same time.
Are we ready?
Yes.
Thank you. Set. Go.
You're going way too slow.
Stand up.
Okay, team one. Good one. All right, time out. Eyes up front. Now remember, you all are responsible for this info, so even if you're not winning this round, you still need to be listening to make sure your answers are correct.
Do we have a curriculum in place that's available for all learners?
There's no noticeable difference between levels of achievement in my co-taught classes and in my other classes. I use the same lesson in my co-taught class as I use in my 4th period class, which is the next period, and it happens to be that 2/3 of that class, they're honor students. You know, they're going to be honor society students. It's the same lesson. It goes at the same pace. They're not any further ahead. There might be times where we maybe have a couple more minutes for some conversation about a topic or maybe an extra anecdote, but it's not a different class. For co-teaching, for me, it's no extra work. I don't have to spend any more time to be able to co-teach because I do the same thing throughout my day. It's the same lesson. What does take the time is it's very important that you have the planning time to meet with the special ed teacher, to meet with that co-teacher, because you want to be on the same page. You want to make sure that the kids are where they need to be and they're getting what they need. So that's the only time part. So you would need, a planning period for that. I keep data on all my students, so that I keep grades. I check for comprehension, for progress on all of my students. So it's not any more or any different. I do spend time with Kim, who's my co-teacher, working together to complete some of that. So if anything, in that class, it saves me a little bit because she's sharing that responsibility with me.
I'm a firm believer in the notion that we're really talking about human variation. That so much of what we know and believe, the models that we have in our minds, are culturally constructed.
Part of our mission statement at this school and part of many schools' mission statements that you want your students to be tolerant and respectful human beings, and being in a situation where you're coming into contact with people that are different than you, I think helps that.
All of us are individuals, all of us have strengths, all of us have challenges, and making the best of those kinds of unique mixes, and encouraging people to look at ways to capitalize on people's strengths and also capitalize on opportunities to collaborate, to cooperate, to talk with one another, to share resources, to give over to one another, I think is the way that inclusion is going to work best.